So we've been talking a lot about Universal lately, and honestly, it makes sense. There's just so much happening over at Universal Orlando right now. Epic Universe is approaching its 1-year anniversary. Islands of Adventure has been getting a lot of attention, and Universal Studios is continuing to change in some pretty massive ways. Universal's just a very fun resort to follow right now, because it feels like every corner of the property has some kind of history, rumor, construction wall, or major change attached to it. But recently I've talked about 5 attractions that I personally think should have lasted a little bit longer in the resort. Basically, 5 rides that closed way too soon. And while I was putting that video together, it sent me down a massive rabbit hole. Because once you really start looking into Universal Orlando's history, you realize just how many attractions have come and gone over the years. I mean, Universal Studios Florida alone has had so many defunct attractions that it almost feels like an entirely different park compared to what it is today. And then when you add Islands of Adventure into the mix, and now even Epic Universe being part of the resort, it really makes you think about how much Universal has evolved over the last few decades. Some of these old attractions are still talked about. Jaws, Back to the Future, Earthquake, those are the big ones. Those are the attractions that usually come up whenever people talk about classic Universal. But there are also a bunch of smaller, forgotten, or just lesser known attractions that used to exist at Universal that a lot of people either do not remember, never got to experience, or maybe never even knew were there in the first place, which is my case today, and that's what I wanted to dive into, because while doing research for these types of videos, it's always fun to discover pieces of theme park history that are not talked about nearly enough. Universal Orlando has shockingly had so many weird and unique and experimental attractions over the years, especially when the resort was first trying to figure out what it wanted to be. So today we're going to talk about 5 attractions you may not know used to exist at Universal Orlando Resort. So let's start off at Universal Studios Florida. Now, Universal Studios is the oldest park at Universal Orlando, obviously, opening all the way back in 1990. So naturally, most of the resort's early history is going to be found here. And when Universal Studios opened, it had a very different identity from what it has today. It was not just a theme park full of screen-based rides and roller coasters and IP-loaded lands. The original purpose of the park were to make guests feel like they were stepping into the world of movie production. The whole idea was that you were not just watching movies, you were seeing how movies were made. And that brings us to the first attraction on this list, the Production Studio Tour. Now, when most people think of a Universal tram tour, they immediately think of Universal Studios Hollywood, and that makes sense. The studio tour in Hollywood is one of the most iconic attractions in theme park history. It is basically the foundation of Universal as a theme park company. To this day, the tram tour is still one of the biggest reasons people visit Universal Studios Hollywood. It is historic, and it takes you through real backlot set production areas and classic movie scenes. But what a lot of people may not know is that Universal Orlando had its own tram tour for a short period of time, and it was the Production Studio Tour. And it opened with Universal Studios Florida on opening day in June of 1990. And honestly, I did not know much about this attraction until I started looking into it more. I knew it existed, but the more I learned, the more interesting it became, because it really shows just how different Universal was when it first opened. Back then, it was not just a theme park, it was also intended to be a working movie production studio similar to Universal Hollywood. Movies, TV shows, commercials, and other projects were supposed to be filmed there, so the Production Studio Tour is meant to give guests a behind-the-scenes look at those facilities. The attraction was located near Nickelodeon Studios, and guests would board a tram for a roughly 15-minute tour around the production areas of the park. The idea was that you would see sound stages, sets, and different parts of Universal's filmmaking process. And on paper, it sounds really cool, but the issue was that Universal Orlando simply did not have the same amount of history, production activity, or physical backlot infrastructure that Universal Studios Hollywood already had. Hollywood had decades of real movie history behind it long before the tram tour even existed. It had famous sets, it had active productions, it had the feeling that you were genuinely touring a legendary movie studio. Orlando was brand new, so while the concept of a tram tour made sense for the original vision of the park, the execution was never going to be able to fully match what people expected from Universal Hollywood. So as a result, the tram tour was not as popular as Universal hoped for, so it would only last 5 years, closing in 1995. And today, the area where guests once boarded the tram is now home to the Universal Studios store right at the front of the park. So when you walk into Universal Studios Florida and see that massive store, it's kind of wild to think that that used to be the starting point to Universal Orlando's own version the world famous tram tour. But staying near the front of the park, let's talk about another attraction that a lot of people may not know, and that is Alfred Hitchcock, the art of making movies. Today, when you enter Universal Studios and head towards Minion Land, one of the first attractions you'll come across is Illumination Villain Con Minion Blast. Before that, the building was home to Shrek 4D, which a lot of Universal fans definitely remember. Shrek 4D was one of those classic early 2000s Universal attractions, goofy, loud, and had moving chairs, water sprays, all the classic 4D theater effects. But before Shrek moved in, the location was home to a very different different kind of show. Alfred Hitchcock, The Art of Making Movies, was another opening day attraction at Universal. It opened with a park in 1990 and lasted until 2003, which means it actually had a pretty decent run, and the attraction itself was really unique. It was a part 3D film, part live action show, and part behind the scenes filmmaking demonstration. It focused on the work of Alfred Hitchcock and showed guests how some of the most famous suspense and horror scenes were created. The pre-show featured elements inspired by The Birds, including an attack sequence that brought guests into the world of Hitchcock's famous film. Then the main show included a recreation of the iconic shower scene from Psycho, with narration connected to Norman Bates actor Anthony Perkins. Honestly, this is the type of attraction that feels so perfect for the original version of Universal Studios. It was not just about putting you into a movie world, it was about showing you how these movie worlds were made. It gave guests a look at camera tricks, special effects, editing, sound, and performance. This was the magic of early Universal. A lot of the opening day attractions were built around the idea of pulling back the curtain. Instead of only experiencing the final product, you got to see the process behind it. And that's why Alfred Hitchcock, The Art of Making Movies, is such an interesting part of the park's history. Sure, it wasn't like a major ride or a huge thrill attraction, but it was creative, and it was very different from what you would find in most theme parks today. And it also feels like the kind of attraction that would probably not be built in the same way now. Modern Universal is very much focused on fully immersive lands and major IP-driven experiences. Back in the day, an attraction about Hitchcock and the art of suspense made perfect sense. But this is 100% one of the attractions I really wish I could have experienced. But this next attraction is one I really had no idea existed when I was researching this topic, and that is the MCA Recording Studio. This was another opening day attraction at Universal, and it was located in an area that had gone through a lot of changes over the years. So the MCA Recording Studios was basically an interactive exhibit that lets guests experiment with different sounds and recording effects used in the post-production process of movies, TV shows, commercials, and even music videos. So while other attractions focused on special effects or movie scenes, this one focused more on sound. And that's actually really cool because sound is such an underrated part of filmmaking. I mean, even think about it right now. This video is solely me just talking to you. That's sound. Without this experience right now, this video would just sound like this. So when you think about a movie, you probably think about the visuals first. You think about the actors, the sets, the camera work, and the special effects, but sound is definitely one of the biggest things that makes a movie feel real. The footsteps, the explosions, the background noise, the dialogue, all of that plays a massive role in how a scene works. And the MCA Recording Studio gave guests a chance to learn about that process in a hands-on way. Guests could experiment with sound effects, recording techniques, and even sing along to their favorite songs. From what I found, guests could also purchase a recording of their own performance, which is such a classic thing for the 90s. It feels like the kind of attraction that would have been really fun for families, especially at a time where behind-the-scenes entertainment was such a major part of the identity of Universal. And this attraction just fit perfectly with the original mission. It was about making guests feel like they were part of the entertainment industry, not just watching the movie or riding through the movie, but understanding how it was created. But the MCA Recording Studio would close in 96 and later become Stage 54 in 97. This was more of a museum-style exhibit featuring props and displays from different Universal productions, but eventually that area would change and become associated with character meet and greets, including the Donkey meet and greet from Shrek, and then today the space is connected to the Minion-heavy area near Illumination's VillainCon Minion Blast and Minion Cafe, where you now can meet different characters from Illumination franchises. So once again, this is another small area of Universal with a surprisingly amount of history behind it. Keeping that trek going, we're going to talk about Murder, She Wrote Mystery Theater, another opening day attraction. And Universal had a lot of these smaller production-based shows at the time, and Murder, She Wrote was another example of that. This was an interactive show based on the television series Murder, She Wrote. During the experience, guests were selected to act as executive producers on a new episode of the show. And this is not just a quick little presentation, it was around 25 minutes long, which is actually pretty lengthy for a theme park show. The attraction focused on the production of television and showed guests different parts of the process, including makeup effects, sound effects, visual effects, and editing. The idea was that you were learning how a mystery episode comes together from behind the scenes. Now, Murder, She Wrote was a very recognizable television property at the time, and Universal Studios was leaning heavily into the idea of television and movie production, so turning that into an interactive theater actually made a lot of sense. But like a lot of early Universal attractions, it did eventually become dated. So the show got canceled in 96, which would lead to the attraction's closure in 96. It was then replaced by Hercules and Xeno, Wizards of the Screen, which is another attraction that a lot of people don't know much about either. The show was also production focused, but instead of solving a mystery, it focused more on action, stunts, and fantasy effects. But that one didn't last very long either. It closed in 2000, and the building sat unused for quite a while before they would tear it down and completely build a massive building that is now home to Transformers The Ride 3D, which opened back in 2013. So that's such a massive jump going from Murder, She Wrote Mystery Theater to then Transformers, and it really shows how much Universal changed over the time. But now let's jump over to Islands of Adventure, because while Universal Studios Florida gets most of the attention when it comes to defunct attractions, Iowa has some interesting history as well. One of the most fascinating examples is the Island Skipper Tours. Now, I've talked about this before in my video about attractions that should have stayed open, as I was saying earlier, and I definitely think this is worth bringing up even in this attraction because a lot of people didn't know this existed. It was a guided boat ride that operated at Iowa during the park's early years. Guests would board a boat near port of entry and take a scenic tour around the park's central lagoon. Gave guests unique views of all the different lands within Islands of Adventure, and honestly, it sounds like such a nice attraction. Iowa is a very intense park. It has major roller coasters, water rides, thrill rides, so having a calm boat tour around the lagoon feels like it would have been a perfect balance. It would have given guests a chance to relax, take in the atmosphere, and see the park from a completely different perspective. I also think this would be especially cool today because Islands of Adventure is one of the most visually interesting theme parks in Orlando. The park has so much rock work, architecture, and kinetic energy around the lagoon. I mean, just imagine this attraction existing going right next to the Mosasaurus roll. It would be awesome, but unfortunately, it would only operate for about a year, and that's what makes it so fascinating because it was such a short-lived attraction that a lot of guests never got the chance to experience. I just really wish they could have kept it around because it could have been that hidden gem that Islands of Adventure truly needed. And I think they would still strongly benefit from something like this today. But those are 5 Universal Orlando attractions that you may not have known existed. What I love about this list is it really shows how different Universal Orlando used to be and the evolution of Universal, how it started from ride the movies to welcome to immersive worlds. Some of these attractions were small, short-lived, and some are probably never going to survive long-term, but they are still such an important part of Universal history. And I think that that's what makes defunct attractions alone so fascinating. Even when they're gone, they still tell us something about what the park used to be and what they were trying to accomplish at the time and how theme parks continue to change. But I want to hear from you. Did you do any of these attractions? Did you get to experience any of the ones I said? And if you did, please comment down below because I would sure love to hear your stories from a lot of these attractions. I love reading and replying to the comments down below. So please tell me some stories or maybe one you didn't know about as well, or one I forgot to mention that I may have forgotten about and can talk about in a future video. Everything is welcome. Please let me know down below. And as always, Hunter from Theme Park Hunting. I will see you all later.